How much of your life would you give to save a stranger? And what happens when that stranger, now a man, returns to a past you've spent 20 years trying to forget? A child's scream is the loneliest sound. It holds the weight of a past you cannot change and a future you fear. The wind howled across the plains, a mournful song through the brittle grass. Inside her small, sod-walled hut, the fire did little to keep the chill at bay. Alawa sat by its meager warmth, a hand-carved doll of juniper wood clutched in her lap. Its face was smooth, featureless. For Alawa, this doll was a mirror, a reflection of the quiet, grief-stricken existence she had carved out for herself. She was a woman of the people, but her heart was a ghost that wandered between two worlds, her own and the world of the white settlers who had taken everything. 20 years had passed since the snow fell, but the cold of that memory never thawed. Her family was gone, wiped away by a sickness that had no name in her language. She was left alone, a fragile reed in a great storm. One morning she found him, a baby, swaddled in a filthy white blanket left by the side of the creek. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. His skin was pale, waxy, and cold as the river stones. A single tuft of golden hair was matted to his forehead. He was an outsider, a child of the very people who had brought sorrow to her land. But in his tiny, suffering form, she saw something else, a reflection of her own lost hope, a mirror of the child she had mourned. She took him in, her hands moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She made a paste of willow bark and the clear sap of pine, rubbing it gently onto his gums to soothe the fever. She crushed juniper berries, mixing them with water for a potent, bitter tea that she spooned into his mouth, drop by drop. She spoke to him in the tongue of her ancestors, her voice a low, steady hum, a lullaby of survival and resilience. For days and nights she held him, her body a shield against the world's indifferent cold. She watched as the life in him, a tiny ember, flickered and then caught fire. His pale skin gained a hint of color, his breathing deepened, and one afternoon he opened his eyes. They were the color of the clear summer sky. He looked at her, not with fear, but with a trusting, infant curiosity. In that moment, something shifted inside Alawa. The grief that had been a stone in her chest became a wellspring of quiet, fierce devotion. She named him Little Son. She knew she couldn't keep him, not forever. The land of her people was shrinking, and the white men's world was expanding. A child of their blood needed to be with his own kind. When the fever finally broke, she knew what she had to do. She packed him in her worn blanket, a small bundle of life against the vast, empty plain. She walked for 2 days, following the sun, until she reached the outskirts of a small town. The air here was different, thick with the smell of sawdust, coal smoke, and something else, the unfamiliar scent of baked bread and brewing coffee. She stood at the edge of the woods, a sentinel of sorrow, and watched the life unfolding in the town below. She saw a woman sitting on a porch, her face etched with a grief she recognized. The woman was holding a small, white bonnet, her gaze fixed on the empty cradle beside her. With a heavy heart, Alawa placed Little Son on the porch, a small prayer whispered into the wind, a final touch on his tiny hand, a silent farewell. As she slipped back into the trees, she looked back. The woman had seen him. A small cry escaped her lips as she rushed forward, her face a mixture of shock and profound relief. Alawa watched her pick up the boy, holding him tight as if he were a precious stolen jewel returned. A single, silent tear tracked a line through the dust on Alawa's cheek. She had saved a life. But in doing so, she had given away a piece of her own. She was once again alone, but this time, the emptiness was different. It was a hollow ache, filled with the ghost of a child she had nursed back to life. She walked back into the wilderness, her steps heavy, her heart a drum of unspoken loss. The juniper doll felt heavier in her hands. She had no one to give it to. 20 years later, the wind still sang the same mournful tune, but the world had changed. The railroad had sliced through the plains, a scar of iron and wood. The town had grown, its false front buildings stretching out like an ugly, new settlement. Alawa was older now, her face a map of the plains and the sorrow they held. The grief was a part of her, a familiar companion. She still lived in her small hut, but the land around her was no longer quiet. The metallic clang of the railroad and the distant shouts of men echoed across the valley. She survived by selling beadwork and woven baskets at the edge of town, a silent, solitary figure. The townsfolk called her the Indian witch, a woman who spoke to no one, her eyes holding secrets they couldn't comprehend. One late afternoon, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a man rode into town. He was tall, with a lean, hard-edged build that spoke of long days in the saddle. He wore a simple, well-worn leather jacket, and his face was a study in stillness. But it was his eyes that caught Alawa's attention. They were the same startling blue as the summer sky, the same blue she had seen in the eyes of a dying baby 2 decades ago. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her. It was him, little son. But he was a man now. A stranger. He dismounted in front of the saloon, his movements fluid and economical. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the dusty street, the same way a hunter surveys his prey. His eyes passed over Alawa, lingering for a fraction of a second, but they held no recognition. How could they? He was a man with a past that was not his own, a life that began in the arms of a woman he did not know. Alawa watched as he walked into the saloon, the swing doors closing behind him with a groan. She felt a profound wave of something she couldn't name, not joy, not sadness. A quiet, terrifying reverence. A feeling that the past had come for its due. A week passed. Alawa watched him from a distance, a ghost haunting the edges of his life. He was a trapper, she learned from the low-voiced whispers in the town. His name was Silas. He was here for supplies, but he stayed on. He sat on the porch of the general store, his eyes scanning the horizon, always restless. One day he came to her stall. He picked up a small, intricately beaded pouch, his fingers tracing the patterns. Alawa's heart pounded against her ribs, a wild drum. He looked at her, his blue eyes holding a question she couldn't answer. "This is good work," he said, his voice low and a little rough, like the sound of shifting stones. Alawa simply nodded. She could not speak. The words were a bitter lump in her throat. He paid her, his hand brushing hers as he took the pouch. The brief contact sent a tremor through her. He was a part of her, a living memory. But he was a stranger. He walked away, and Alawa felt the quiet, hollow ache of a mother who has given up her child. She was filled with an unbearable need to tell him, to say, "I saved you. I am the reason you breathe this air." But the words were locked behind the grief and silence of 20 years. What would she even say? That his life began not with the woman who raised him, but with a stranger from a different world. That his past was a lie? She couldn't burden him with that. He had a life, a name, a home. Her secret was a weight that was hers to bear alone. The town was a pressure cooker of simmering tensions. A group of men, led by a brutish land speculator named Gideon, had been harassing the local tribes. They wanted to expand their mining claims, and the remaining Indian settlements were in the way. Alawa had watched as they rode out, their faces hard with greed. She had seen the fear in the eyes of her people, and now, this man, this boy she had saved, was in the middle of it. One evening she saw Silas in the saloon, surrounded by Gideon's men. They were laughing, their voices sharp with alcohol and disdain. Silas sat with a stoic stillness, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. "Heard you're a good trapper, boy," Gideon sneered, his voice loud. "Maybe you can track down some of those savages. Get them off our land." Silas didn't respond, his silence a stone wall. The tension in the room thickened, a tangible thing. Gideon's men laughed, but their laughter was brittle. Silas finished his drink, put a coin on the bar, and walked out. The silence that followed him was heavy, laced with a dangerous undercurrent. Alawa, hidden in the shadows, felt a profound relief. He was not one of them. He was a quiet, lonely man, a man who seemed to walk between worlds, just as she did. The weight of her secret pressed on her, a burden she couldn't put down. She had to protect him, not from the physical threat of Gideon, but from the truth that would shatter the world he knew. The final act began with a storm. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and the wind, a living entity, tore at the trees and the flimsy buildings. Rain came down in sheets, washing the town of its dust, revealing the rot beneath. Alawa was in her hut, the wind rattling the door. She sat by the fire, a small, worn photograph in her hands. It was the only photograph she had ever taken from the abandoned campsite where she found the baby. It was a faded image of a young woman with a kind smile, a man with a weary face, and an empty cradle in the background. The family he belonged to. The family she had given him to. It was her secret, her connection to a life she could never have, a life she had saved. A knock at the door, sharp and insistent, broke her reverie. Alawa looked up, her heart a frantic bird. She knew who it was. The knock came again, and then the door was pushed open. Rain lashed the small room, and standing there, a silhouette against the storm, was Silas. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked different, his stillness gone, replaced by a desperate urgency. "Are you the Indian woman who sells the baskets?" he asked, his voice strained. Alawa nodded, her throat too tight for words. "I need your help," he said. He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning the space, taking in the beadwork, the quiet order, the fire. "There's a boy, a trapper's son, sick with a fever. The doctor in town says he can't do anything for him." His blue eyes, the color of her memory, were pleading. "The men said you know things, that you know what to do." He stood before her, a stranger asking for her help. A man asking the woman who had saved him to save another. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. Her heart ached with a profound, complicated love. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the boy she had saved, but the man he had become. A man of quiet strength and deep empathy. A man who cared for a stranger's child in the middle of a storm. He was good, and that was her doing. Her silent, anonymous gift to the world. She rose from her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to her medicine pouch, a worn leather bag filled with the remedies of her people. She took out a bundle of dried herbs, a small jar of pine sap, and a smooth, river-polished stone. She did not speak. There was nothing to say. He followed her out into the lashing rain, their footsteps silent on the muddy path. They found the boy in a small, damp cabin on the outskirts of town. He was lying on a makeshift cot, his skin hot and flushed, his breathing shallow and rapid. His father, a burly, weathered man, watched them with a mix of suspicion and desperation. Alawa knelt beside the boy, her hand on his forehead, her eyes closing. She felt the fierce heat of the fever, the battle for his life. She began to hum, a low, melodic sound, the same song she had sung to Silas 20 years ago. She brewed a potent tea from the herbs and carefully spooned it into the boy's mouth. She made a paste with the pine sap and a handful of dirt, rubbing it into the boy's chest. Her movements were ancient, practiced, a sacred ritual passed down through generations. Silas watched her, his face a mask of awe and concern. He saw not an Indian witch, but a healer, a woman of profound, quiet power. The night wore on. The boy's fever raged, then broke, then raged again. Alawa and Silas sat in silence, two strangers united by a shared purpose. The boy's breathing evened out, his skin cooled, and he finally slipped into a deep, healing sleep. The storm had passed, leaving a stillness in its wake. The cabin was quiet, lit only by the soft light of a single lantern. Silas looked at Alawa. his blue eyes holding a gratitude so deep it was almost a question. "Thank you," he said, his voice a whisper. Alawa simply nodded. Her work was done. She stood to leave, but Silas stopped her. "Wait," he said. "The doctor in town, he said it was hopeless." He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching. You saved him." Alawa looked at the floor, at the dust she had helped to create. She couldn't meet his eyes. "You saved me, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and certain. Alawa's head shot up. How did he know? Had he seen the photograph? The woman? He held out a small, beaded pouch. It was the one he had bought from her a week ago. "The woman who raised me, she gave me this before she died." He pulled a worn leather strip from inside the pouch, a simple, unadorned thing. "She said a woman gave it to her, left a baby on her porch with this in the blanket. She said the baby was a gift from the spirits, a miracle." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a new kind of light, a fragile, hard-won understanding. "She said she saw you. A woman in the trees. You never came to see me. Never spoke." Alawa's eyes filled with tears, a silent river of a grief she had carried for so long. She looked at the worn leather strip in his hand. It was the strap from her old medicine bag, the one she had used to carry the herbs and medicines she had used to save him. She had left it in the blanket, a silent witness. A piece of herself she had given away. "I had to go," she whispered, her voice rough with years of disuse. "Your people needed you." "My people?" he asked, a bitter smile on his face. "The woman who raised me, she said she found me. She never told me what happened. I always wondered. I always felt like a piece of me was missing." His gaze was steady, compassionate. "It was you." Alawa could only nod. The dam broke. All the years of silence, of walking alone with her secret, came crashing down. Tears streamed down her face, a release she hadn't known she was capable of. Silas stepped forward, his hand reaching out, hesitant, then resting on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, a connection forged in the past and renewed in the present. "I am sorry," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "I had to give you a life." "You gave me a life," he said, a quiet certainty in his tone. "Not the woman who raised me. You." He didn't ask her to come with him. He didn't ask her to be a part of his life. He simply stood there, his hand on her shoulder, his blue eyes holding the truth of their shared history. He understood. He knew that she was a woman of two worlds, and that a piece of her grief and her resilience, was now a part of him. The boy in the cot stirred, his breathing even and deep. A new day was dawning, the storm-washed sky a clean pale blue. The world was quiet now, a stillness that was not empty, but filled with the profound weight of a secret shared. Alawa and Silas stood there, two souls who had once been one, separated by a life given and a life received. They were strangers, and yet they were family. He was a son she had given away, and she was a mother he had found. The debt was not repaid, but it was acknowledged. In the quiet understanding that passed between them, a new kind of peace had taken root. She was no longer just the woman who had saved a dying baby. She was Alawa, and she was seen. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.